Well, thank you everyone for joining Dr. Blake Curtis and I. We're looking forward to this call. We've been chatting about this for a number of months, and the conversation started long before we ever knew we were going to be presenting this. So we are definitely looking forward to it. So we're going to just jump right in and get started. So I am Mike Battistella, one of your presenters, and Dr. Blake Curtis is with me. And you are really going to love what you hear from Dr. Blake. He is a research scientist who led an international study titled The Next Generation Cybersecurity Auditor. He used the skills framework for information age to identify a technical competency gap in the Big Four IT auditors and subject matter experts. His research results can be generalized to 150,000 IT auditors. Dr. Curtis also helped debunk Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, 10 years of experience rule. And however, Dr. Curtis' most impressive feat is that he's the first scientist to scientifically debunk the years of experience fallacy. His study proved that task-based experience is more objective than time-based experience. Dr. Curtis is also the author of How to Complete Your Master's Degree in One Semester. I definitely want to read that book. And over 15,000 views have helped over 150 students complete their master's degree in record-setting times. Dr. Blake, I am excited to be doing this with you.
Me as well. Let's go ahead and hop right into it, Mike.
You got it. So, yeah, so let's dive into it. So first thing I wanted to do is just cover the executive order. We're not going to do a deep dive into it. We would need a few hours or more to do that, but certainly, hit some of the really important points. So, just kind of giving you a breakdown of sections, and I won't read all this to you, but there's 11 different sections of the order. And what I want to do is just hit each one by subject area and kind of hit the high points and point out a few things. So we've got policy and removing barriers of sharing threat information and modernizing the federal government cybersecurity. And that removing barriers, it's really an important point because we have so many different federal agencies, departments, organizations, and if any of you watch NCIS and FBI and any of these streaming shows, it's really hard to share information, and you've got a lot of different folks gathering information, intelligence agencies gathering information. We've really got to share, and it makes a point of the supply chain, how important the supply chain is to the federal government, and kind of the restrictions and mandates that we all have. Establishing a cybersecurity review board, that makes a lot of sense. Standardizing the federal government's playbook, i.e., incident response. Improving detection of vulnerabilities. I would say threat hunting and comparing against vulnerabilities, and of course improving the federal government's remediation capabilities. So there's a number of things that are in there: national security systems, definitions, provisions. So let's look at each one just very quickly, so we can get into the open format. But Section 1 clearly spells out identify, protect, detect, and respond. And for those of you that are familiar with the NIST Cybersecurity framework, you obviously recognize those. So the executive order does not come right out and say you will adhere to the NIST Cybersecurity framework, but every indication is that you will adhere to the NIST Cybersecurity framework. So I just wanted to point that out. So 4 of the 5 main pillars of the NIST CSF are called out in Section 1. So pay attention to the capital letters and anything that I'm trying here to really identify. Also in Section 1, it clearly identifies that there is a digital infrastructure that must be protected, and we are doing everything from a business standpoint with digital information. Also, it recognizes the importance of agency sharing threat information. It calls out best practices. Keep that one in mind. And it also calls out that contractors share the burden of what is being called out in the federal space. Looking to modernize approach. That's a really important word right there. The approach. Going toward and leaning toward into a zero trust architecture. That's going to be an important call as well. Secure cloud services and improving our risk management approach. Okay, now get ready for some of the big ones here. The Section 4 calls out the critical role of the supply chain, of which many of us are a part of. And the director of NIST is playing a key role. So let's see if the director of NIST is playing a key role. And you've already called out 4 of the 5 pillars of the NIST CSF. I got to believe that that's going to be an important part of all of this. Section 5, you've got your review and assess cyber incidents, threat activity, mitigation activities, agency responses, and they're looking for overall improvement. Section 6 focused on incident response, and here's where the 5th pillar comes in, recovery, has been added. And they're specifically calling out that the director of NIST is going to leverage the current NIST standards. Maybe there'll be some tweaks, but also potentially add some standards. And one of the ones I call out, Dr. Blake, is NIST 800-128. And that's your security focused configuration management. And I often get into conversations about the IT focus versus the cybersecurity focus. Let me just pause here. What are your thoughts when it comes to the separation of IT versus cybersecurity? Or when I look at a cybersecurity focused configuration management, I see a real pull-in of IT operations, IT service management, and cybersecurity. So just kind of ad hoc, what are your thoughts there?
I think like if you're going to keep a due diligence aspect, it makes sense to have security outside. You want them to be as independent and non-vested. However, you don't typically have your security evangelists in the IT side, and so they're saying that it's more of a bolt-on process. And when you want to mandate an executive order like this, it's going to make sense to security-centric people, but the IT people, it's not going to really make a lot of sense because they're not really used to it. And so they're like looking at security controls like, oh, it's just something I have to do versus, oh no, this actually protects critical infrastructure.
Yeah, and I look at it as sometimes the IT folks see the cyber team as they're just an impediment. They're holding everything up. We can't move forward. But yet, when configuration management, which is such a cornerstone for IT service management,
Right.
and there's a completeness standard on doing it in a secure way. Yeah, I agree. Ownership has to be separated, but these two teams working together are going to get the best value. From
they're
that.
also just very technically focused. I mean, you think about it though, when you get into IT, that may be the only thing that you know for decades. And so you could be doing these jobs, but you have no idea how it generates value for the business portfolio, the enterprise. And so it's hard to really understand when someone in the business is telling you you need to do these things. You're like, oh, it makes no sense. Yeah, because the training that we have is just inadequate. We don't have businessmen and women. We just have techies and business people.
Yeah. Well, you're going to see those lines blur, I think, for sure. Section 7 gets into threat hunting, threat detection, vulnerability assessments, and whatnot. And what I was seeing here is a real sense of, we have to proactively go out and look for threats, right? So often we're just waiting for the thing to happen, and then we'll respond, and we're hoping that we have some of our incident response thing, activities and whatnot defined, and we'll follow them, but we're just kind of waiting for the thing to happen. Where when you really go out and you proactively are looking at what threats are out there, what's taking place, what kind of conversations are going on in the dark web, and then identifying, okay, we see a threat, we see a real threat happening here. How are we going to, how vulnerable are we against that threat? Or if that's exercised, and how do we protect ourselves in advance proactively, and then how are we going to look for if that threat is getting in our way, and the only way I see that really happen is operationalizing that approach and saying, what, we've got to put processes and procedures in place so that we are prepared in advance.
Right. I would agree. I think the process and procedure is great. And, the adoption of NIST CSF makes a lot of sense. I think the one thing that we have to accompany with it is like minimum competency requirements as well. Because one thing that we found in the study that we could generalize up to 150,000 people is that everybody had sufficient book knowledge, right? Your assessors, they're like, level 3 book knowledge, which is fine. But your SMEs were like level 4, which they should be. They're implementing it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to threat detection and vulnerability management, that knowledge significantly declined, like negative 26%. So what the issue there is, like, you have NIST CSF, but you have certifications that are promoting multiple choice exams, no hands-on. And so when we're speaking controls, people don't know how to implement them. People don't interpret them the same. So the processes are great, but what are you going to do to mandate minimum competency requirements as well?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm gonna suggest we buzz through the rest of these because I think the real meat is what's coming, right? So this will give us we set the table and give everyone a sense of where we're at. But I think that that operationalizing of the controls becomes real important because the controls are saying what needs to be done or kind of what's the minimum level that you need to pass the audit, and that's really a mindset that we have to change for
Right.
sure. So collecting, maintaining logs and things like that, these are things from a network and system management, application database management. This is these are things that we've been doing for years and years.
Right.
We're gathering, we're collecting, we're monitoring, we're looking for things that log files can tell us, but also we've got to get into from a cybersecurity standpoint. Are we doing the same thing? How long are we keeping them? How are we protecting them? It goes into a number of things that we're gonna hit, and the definition and adoption. That's the key word. Adoption of the national system security requirements is going to be across the board. I would say Section 10 hits general terms and definitions, and general Section 11. That's kind of just the CYA section. So. Let's get into the meat of it. So one of the things that I really saw was it is going to be framework based, and clearly having NIST and the drivers behind a lot of this, DHS CISA, it kind of makes it clear to me that the CSF and the risk management framework, as well as other frameworks, are going to be clear indicators of what's coming. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. So one, I think participants said they can't see the slides, so they may want to make sure the presentation is showing.
Okay, that's going to be a big one. That's going to throw me again. Let's do this. Okay, do you see a harmonica?
I don't see anything on this end yet. Yeah. I could try to undo it from mine, Mike, if you want me to.
I'm going to try one more thing.
Okay.
And I'm not seeing it. So yeah, why don't you go ahead and try?
All right, I'll try on my end, and I'll let you just kind of speak from those. All right.
Yep.
Let's see what we got here. And, all right, I'm sharing mine. How's mine looking?
Much better than mine. Right now we're seeing the deck, so we just need to see the screen in full share mode.
Okay, let me try that one more time. Let's see if it's going to allow me to do it. Did it still go full screen? You still can see the deck itself.
Seeing the deck.
Yeah, it may not. We may just have to go through the deck this way because it's not allowing me to do it. Okay. All right. All right. What slide you want to go to? Slide 6?
Yeah. No, let's go to 7.
Okay.
And just blow that up as big as you can for everyone.
All right. All right, let's try that. Try it one more time, and it should work.
If not, you know what? Okay. Well, let's just go with that. See in your upper right-hand screen, you've got share up there. Okay. Well, let's go through it because we're going to run out of time quickly. But so I'll just jump in, Blake. It talks about the importance of establishing best practices, and I think a lot of those are going to come from the standards that NIST is providing. And what becomes very obvious is the mandates that are going to follow, right? If you've got an executive order, things need to happen. Once you establish that, okay, the NIST CSF is going to be our framework or our set of best practices, they become standards, and then next thing you know, you've got mandates. Critical or continuing improvement. I always like that because Blake, I'm a long-term ITIL guy.
Right.
So on the ITIL side, it's very clear: continual service improvement. Always looking better than you were before. And I think too, it's clear that cybersecurity is not a technology only solution. It's not the silver bullet. It's not like, let's look at, for example, at the zero trust. They're leaning towards zero trust. Well, that's there's not a single tool that's going to establish zero trust for us, right? There's going to be people involved, processes, different technologies coming together and being integrated. So there's going to be a lot there, and continual service improvement clearly means we're also training our people, educating them, filling those skills gaps that you mentioned.
Right. That's definitely what we're missing. I mean, you can have the greatest culture and mindset in place, but if you're a manager today and you can't quantitatively say what skills your team has or doesn't have, I mean, you're shooting in the dark. So to say like, oh yeah, we're ready to adopt the framework, are you? I mean, because you got the NIST CSF, which is great, but me and you were just talking too. It would be nice if you would see NIST National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education Framework that comes right along with it. So when you say I'm going to focus on the incident response phase, okay, what skills do you need? What certifications align to those skills? How would I test that? How would I interview someone? Because most of what we do today is very subjective. So I do think those things do have to be paired together.
Yeah, I agree. And even training around the NIST framework, which is an area that I play in quite a bit. I see a lot of training out there that says, here's the control. Here's why it's important.
Yeah.
Here's the control. Yeah. Here's why it's important. We could go through a lot of that, but where's the training that says, well, how do I implement these controls? And somebody would normally come back to me and say, well, so what tool are we talking about? The training for what tool? I don't mean, when I say how do I yeah, I don't mean what dialog box, how do I configure that in the tool? I got to look at it from the position, the chairs that you and I sit in is, if I'm looking at that control, what's the capability, functionality that I need out of that tool, that I need out of that configuration, not what command do I execute or what dialog box do I fill out? Yeah. So I think that becomes really important.
I think we become over reliant on seeing these certain degrees and certs and if we hire a CSSP or a CISM, they'll definitely be able to implement that. And we forget that those are all theoretical multiple choice tests. Those don't reflect reality. And we're going to see more CISP and CISM that maybe have level 1 knowledge or level 2 that don't have the hands-on skills to actually implement these controls.
Yeah. And, I'm almost leaning toward, I always lean toward ITIL folks because they've already got this process, procedure, workflow mentality. Sometimes they're afraid of the tools, because you've got your tool experts, which you need. You absolutely need your
Right.
tool experts, but defining the process, the approach, the methodology. How am I going to instrument that process in my tools? How am I going to automate the procedures, the underlying procedures of those processes? And how am I going to automate the workflow within my tool suite? So it becomes this hierarchical building of, process definition. So I tend to lean toward, I tell folks that have that kind of, approach. And then also, I'm really looking at my scrum masters and project
Yeah.
managers because they're already thinking that way. It's really
Yeah.
great.
I think you have to, because we're so agile focused that now brings in the cybersecurity and auditing practices and project management practices that have been so waterfall. So
Hmm.
how are we going to now like generate the appropriate security controls based off NIST or some other commensurate framework to say, all right, this is what I'm going to give my developers. This is what I'm
Yeah.
going to build, give my actual engineers. So while they're building their non-functional requirements, they're also bringing in those functional requirements at the same time. So you're building security as you're building your products instead of trying to bolt it on at the last minute.
Yep. Yep. So Blake, just based on time, I'm gonna let's. I want to ask you that. What do you feel is really being asked for?
I think we are trying to mandate something that's not quite possible yet. So we don't work in a regulated profession. IT, cyber, and IT audit are not regulated fields. Now, most people will argue that, oh, DoD 8570 list is out there. That's guidance for DoD. Um, when we say regulated, that means if you look at someone who that's a doctor, a pharmacist, or a surgeon, or a lawyer, there's one thing they all have in common. Even a house inspector is they all are licensed, and they cannot practice without license. Me and you are not licensed. Nobody on this phone call are licensed to do anything IT. Now, we have certifications, but the certifications are voluntary, and there is no ramifications for not meeting those, right? And another symptom of being an unregulated environment is look how many certifications you have. You have over 930 of them across 56 vendors. That should be alarming to you right there,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
what it should be is, okay, is there an accrediting body at the state and federal level that mandates minimum? Now, you can't do that for all professionals, right? Because you would then stifle the workforce gap even more. But what you could do it for is like high level positions, CIOs, CISOs, and IT auditors who are responsible for actually protecting this. But that kind of comes back to, how can you mandate something like NIST CSF but also not regulating the industry? Like the two don't really go together. That makes sense, Mike?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It it's kind of like this conflict that's just happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think the other thing that would be nice is you can mandate something that truly has good merits and good principles, but there's always the trifecta that you need to align across, right? So let's say NIST goes into place and it is going to be mandatory, right? Then you're going to have to realign your academic programs too. That means anything that's in bachelor's and master's that's on cybersecurity, people need to be learning those skills, how to
Hmm.
implement it,
Hmm.
because those are the employable skills. And the problem is that we do not have an aligned framework. And I always promote the Sophia framework, SFIA, to say, all right, however we're educating the next generation needs to be commensurate with what the certification vendors are also saying they're going to have, but also needs to be aligned to job descriptions. Like, why are you creating your own job descriptions? It makes not a lot of sense. By creating your own job descriptions and not aligning to a framework, you're actually creating a skills gap. And so when you're
That's
trying to put something this big in place, it just doesn't go together.
that's really a great point. How many of us in the industry, when we're looking to hire a cyber person or whatever it might be, align the job description with what the framework requires. And
Right.
interestingly enough, I'm spending a lot of time with universities, and
Mm.
specifically Fairleigh Dickinson here in New Jersey, and working with their professors. And I actually met individual, I won't say by name, uh, but she's the liaison between Fairleigh Dickinson, the university, and the businesses. And she pulled
Mhm.
me in for the conversation. What are the businesses looking for? And are we providing what the businesses are looking for in our
Right.
cybersecurity students? And the answer is a resounding no. We're
Yeah.
teaching a lot of you know shareware tools. We're teaching them how to be penetration testers. We're teaching them how to be ethical hackers. We're teaching them a lot of the technology. But as far as the best practices, the framework, and I jokingly say, and it's not exactly like this, but it's pretty close. So I had a couple of interns last year, fifth-year students in their master's program. I had 4 this year, and I asked them all the same question. What do you remember? What did you cover from a NIST cybersecurity framework standpoint?
Right.
And the response was kind of like this. Well, let's see. Identify, detect, protect,
Right.
respond, recover, respond, something like that.
Right.
And they really didn't get into the depths of it. And we put all 6 of these, and I have 2 more going through this fall. But we put them all through the NIST cybersecurity professional training, because I want them to know what the frameworks are, what the controls are, what the benefits of aligning with a framework like that. But that's the big gap that I see, because now all of a sudden, especially in the federal space where I spend a lot of my time, the job descriptions, the requirements are coming out that individuals that are responding or looking to fill the slot have to have a NIST 853 or some NIST CSF or the risk management framework, some kind of familiarity at least, so they have the talking knowledge of it. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of comes to that 4th bullet point, that urgency. Why? Well, if you turn on the news right now, most of the attacks that are happening are cyber related. And so if you ask your average consumer right now, okay, well, how do we know that the cybersecurity workforce is competent enough? We're going to spit out a lot of business talk and a lot of certifications. The problem is that even when we broke down certifications, no individual certification improves performance. It doesn't. Like I said, most of them are multiple choice. But what we start seeing is when you start mixing the certifications, like some that are reviewer or diagnostic, like auditing certifications or GRC. Then you mix some that are cyber. Then you mix some that actually implement the technology. And that's the key point, is the implementing. Without having the implementing piece, your viewpoint of competency is very myopic. You can only see things from an accounting and an auditor perspective, because that's the realm you came from. Or you can only see things from a program manager or project manager perspective. But when you've implemented something, it becomes more materialized. You know what it looks like when it's factual. You know what it looks like when somebody's trying to like yank your chain, right? So I think at this point now, one, we do have a skills gap, but it's not truly a skills gap. I think it's more onto the hiring practices. Like, we're trying to hire people that have a certain certification or have higher academic degrees. Newsflash, people, those don't significantly influence performance. What you can do and what we can see is what we need to be hiring for. And so mandating something that's not scientific will continue to give us issues, and we can't really support something like the NIST CSF or the executive order.
So what do you think? What do you see as our way ahead?
I think the path forward here for me, I'm actually the author of the cybersecurity auditing certificate for ISACA now. So where we've been typically saying ISO 27001, or we've been saying high trust and so forth, I need to get people more involved with the Center for Internet Security benchmark, CIS, which NIST CSF calls out. A lot of people don't realize, if you look at NIST CSF, there's 3 tiers of framework. Strategic is COVID, your operational is NIST and ISO, and then your tactical will be CIS. Well, guess what? They all map. So if you're talking about least privilege and SOD, you got that aspect. But if you tell an auditor, how do you do that in Kubernetes or Palo Alto? CIS tells you that. That's why we have the competency gap in America right now.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And what I see from an auditing, at least we're hitting the auditing approach as that first bullet, is in the world that I'm playing in. The federal contractors 800 171, the govies 853. There's this sense of, I just have to pass the audit. I just have to get through that. And so, there's all of this angst and stress and, a lot of dollars spent in consulting and, professional services. And then you pass the audit, and it's kind of like, oh, I passed the audit. Could you pass the mustard?
Like you're paying for the paper almost.
Yeah. And it's almost like, and I jokingly say, could you pass the mustard? Because that's an indicator that okay, I accomplished that. And now it's back to business as usual. It's
Yeah,
just back to business as usual versus, okay, we have our starting point.
yeah,
And if we could wrap process and procedure, and being a long-term ITIL guy, can I set up that continual service improvement mentality so that I'm taking where I am today, and you and I would both agree that there are a lot of major breaches that happened
yeah,
that they passed the audit. And
yeah. They don't
and
want to talk about those.
and did it
It's
really
the big
help them?
four. They sweep that under the rug. That's what literally what started my research, Mike, was the 2017 Equifax breach. I was more interested in, did they pass an audit? And they did pass the ISO 27001 audit. I think the firm was Certified Point, which is an extension of Ernst& Young.
Hmm.
Newsflash. But I was like, okay, well, who was really on the hook, because Equifax paid Ernst& Young or Certified Point for it, right?
Hmm.
So if you're paying for a service and you certified them against vulnerability management, then why was there, so many millions of compromised information from the same vulnerability? And so that's what led to my study, and why I kept digging into it and found that, okay, well, since 1956 to 2021, we've had a competency gap. We've just split audit, we split IT and split cyber, but we have not been collaborating effectively, and it's still increasing the gap for modern technology. But we don't even know what it looks like for emerging technology like AI and cognitive networks and so forth. That's the scary part.
Yeah. Yeah. Quantum computing is right around the corner. And
Right.
uh, and for me, it's, can I just get them in that mentality that says, okay, I passed the audit. I did the minimum, but that's not good enough for us. Can
Right.
we look at that as our starting point and say, okay, these process and procedures, this continual service improvement, and CSI, continuous security improvement, which works well too.
Right.
How am I going to constantly get better? And I said it yesterday in my presentation, and I'll say it again today for anyone listening. If we can get to the point where that auditor shows up in the parking lot and calls and say, I'm here for that unannounced audit, it doesn't freak us out. We can say, bring it on. We are better than we were when we did the audit. We continually improve anything that we're doing. We're always looking to get better, and I think that's going to be the industry mentality, that we have to be looking to continually get better, so that
Right.
it doesn't matter what's happening out there. Why don't we jump to the next one, so that we can let these folks go, because we're a little bit over. But I think that's kind of my starting point. We
Mhm.
want to make sure the audit is the starting point. It's not the final destination, and we are taking continual improvement into consideration.
Right.
That training is critical. Training is absolutely critical, and the more we can partner with the business and have that security focused approach, is going to be better for all of us. Let me ask you, sir, as we're
Mhm.
winding down, what are your final thoughts, and then maybe see if there's any questions we can answer before we drop.
I think the final starts is, whether we want to admit it or not, this all circles back to hiring and promotion processes, and kind of the good old boy system, where we've been focused on, oh, if someone has been in the field longer, and we call this years of exposure, not experience, then theoretically they should be more experienced. There's no science behind it. And so when then you start mandating years of experience with no scientific proof, and you can look at some of my other content while I break it down, you're like, oh, well, that's why we have a gap. Because you could have someone with 10 years of experience or 5 years of experience. But if you focus on what they have to do, and you say, all right, the guy with 10 years experience, how many times have you performed these critical tasks on the job description? He says he's done it 50 times. But I look at the guy with half the amount of experience, he says, I've done it 150 times. And his quality is better.
Hmm.
That's hiring. I don't think you get a free pass because you've been around longer. I think that's quite unethical. And plus, nobody knows how long they have on this earth. So you don't mandate something that will truly, it just doesn't even seem ethical. And the last point here is, from the auditing and implementing perspective, there needs to be more hybridization. Remember, within this CSF and NIST, there's over 33 subdisciplines of cybersecurity. So there's no such thing as a cybersecurity expert. No such thing, because you would have to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities in task performance in all 33 subdisciplines. So once we start tailoring our training for those, and we start bringing the auditors to get them even more technical and come across the path, I am very, very hopeful. And I think that's going to come through hands-on training and moving away from multiple choice exams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I can't help but comment, but you know, this thing that you've shared with me since day one, you know, the years of exposure versus years of experience. I've shared it with you, but I want it with the general audience. I'm on federal contractors right now, contracts right now, where I'm submitting individuals that are not meeting the minimum years of experience. And I can't help but find myself frustrated that, yeah, I can find candidates that have the 10 years experience that you're asking for, but I wouldn't even put them in front of the contracting officer.
Right.
You know, they don't have the skill set yet. I'm talking to somebody with, you know, 3 to 5 years of experience, and
Yeah.
they clearly have the skill set,
Yeah.
you know, for the position. And I find that really frustrating because, you know, I'd rather have that individual on the team than the one that has been around for a while and they're just used to doing it the same old way, and you know, they can pass the
Right.
requirements, kind of thing.
Just live longer. We'll eventually hire you. That's
Yeah.
what we're saying. And
Yeah.
I'll close out with this too. It's like, for those who question, like, okay, why does he keep saying years of experience and years of exposure? Me and Mike know this well, but if you Google how many hours in a year of a year, there's 8,760, and nobody works 52 weeks out the year and 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. Nobody does. And so when we did the math, we found that we only work on average 2,080 hours. That's not even a quarter of 8,760. And so you're mandating something that's not real, like at all. And when me and Mike talked about it, it's okay, well, that's cool, but at an 8-hour workday, like, how many hours are you actually doing the task outside of meetings? On average, in our assessment, it's only 2 to 4 hours. So that means at tops, you're only going to have about 1,040 hours where you're actually doing your job in a year. That means it would take you 7 to 8 years to get one quantifiable year of experience. Wow. See why we're mandating something that's just not real?
Yeah, that's very realistic. Hey, we are over time, so I think any questions that we have, we'll circle back with the folks and try to answer them offline. But Dr. Blake, as always, it is a great time when we're chatting.
Thank you for having me, bud.
Hey, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you attending, and we'll go ahead and drop out. Thanks so much. Okay, I'm just going to hang on here in case.
I'm going to hang back too, just in case there's any questions.
Yep.
All right, so Drew Nations asks, does the Isaac certificate system auditor cover this? Let me answer that question. I love that question. True. All right, and Drew, if you're listening, I'm going to speed this one because it's going to be recorded. So the CISA certification doesn't go in depth as far as like how much hands-on experience you need to have, and they do accompany it with an auditing standard called the ITAF, which is the Information Technology Assurance Framework. So they won't actually tell you how much experience you need, and they don't quantify it either, because there's just not a set number on there. So with the CISA, it's saying, you know, don't ever take on a task unless you have experience in there. But the problem with all the IT audit standards is that they're not enforceable. Like, we're good from a legality perspective if we go to court or something like that. But for actually saying, okay, you need to be this level of task experience, then no. All right, and Drew, you had another question about CIS, not as clear in action was 853. This is true. And I even think that Mike would say, if you read anything NIST, you're probably a scientist because it's hard as hell to understand.
Yeah.
But with CIS, what I would recommend, Drew, is go to the workbench.cis.org website. If you just try to go to the regular page, a lot of it doesn't make sense. But what Mike is promoting in me is 853 actually has a cross map to CIS. So anytime you look up like AC3 access control or so forth, it will actually map back to those CIS benchmarks. And so that's how we were actually able to distinguish theoretical knowledge, things that you would interpret in NIST, but then what would it actually look like on an actual control? So that hopefully that answers your question, but I can definitely answer that more online, offline as well. And Mike, let's see here. Mike, did you want to kind of touch on the NCSP certification, how you make it more practical and hands-on?
Yeah, I'll hit that real quickly for anyone listening in. So, as I mentioned during the presentation, there's a lot of NIST training, and literally when I say they walk through and say, here's the control and here's why it's important. Overall, I think folks are doing a good job with that. Where they're missing it is that's where they're stopping, and they're not getting into the how we implement these controls, nor are they getting into the considerations you need to take into account before you implement the controls. What kind of KPIs are you going to look at to measure the success of those controls, and what kind of mechanism for measuring the value or the benefit of those controls. So that's where NCSP comes in, the NIST Cybersecurity Professional Training and Certification Program that I'm tied to. So what we're doing there, and the best analogy I can give is it's basically ITIL for cybersecurity, and I know that's not a one-for-one map, but it's the NCSP program is looking at the controls. How do we operationalize these things? How do we measure them? How do we implement them? And it's basically an overall ITIL process. So the same way ITIL will have your different areas: change management, configuration, service level management, release, request, all the different areas, and they literally go through and define a process for that area. And then you have your underpinning procedures defined, the automation of your workflow. So that's kind of what NCSP is all about. And there's more. There's much more to it, but that's just a generalization where now you can look at it and say, okay, I have this area. Let's say it's access management or access control. What are we going to do it? What's our process going to be? How are we going to move toward? And I love the when we talked about the executive orders leaning towards zero trust. Zero trust is a mammoth thing. It's a big thing to take on, and it involves a lot of different areas. You don't wake up one day and say, I think today's the day we're going to do zero trust. You take your access control and you're in that service improvement. So what might you do? How are we doing centralized access control? We're making sure that we're doing multi-factor authentication. Okay, so typically when we say multi-factor, we're really doing two-factor. And so how do we add a third to it? So when we start to really look at, okay, I've got my my login and my password, good. I've got strong passwords, awesome. How am I managing my passwords? How am I protecting my passwords? We add that second factor. Maybe it's an authentication app. So now I'm getting my code. I go in. Now I've provided my code. Now I get the diagram that comes up, select the boxes that have a motorcycle in it. I've just added another factor, and we're starting to lean toward, I'm going to go towards zero trust. I'm going to make sure I'm questioning everything. And people get kind of nervous about that, well, but I trust my people. Well, that's good. We've trusted a lot of people that have stole a lot of national secrets, over the years. So it's really getting that, we can't do it overnight. We have to have a slow process and really build into it. And I think that's where, a lot of this is going, where we look at the controls. And Blake, I've shared with you many times. I don't like in the audits, assessments, let's say assessment readiness would be the appropriate term. I don't like that. When we're looking at a particular control, we've passed or we failed, and be great if I got partial credit. When I went to college and whatnot, if I passed, I wanted to know, did I pass with a 70? And I have a lot of headroom to grow and improve, or did I pass with a 98? And I'm good in that area, and I can focus on the areas maybe I'm not so strong in. So, I really look at it like, from an ITIL perspective, I used to say I'm using a CMMI-like model where I have a level of maturity. So if I'm at a 1, I know I want to get to a 2. If I'm at a 1, maybe I can jump to a 3. but at least I know where I am on the spectrum so I can put a plan of improvement together. With this pass or fail thing, I don't think it works. And I'm rambling at this point, but I hope that gives some insight for folks. Blake, you still there? Nope. I saw you pop in and out. All right. So thank you, everyone. Enjoyed the conversation and look forward to the next time.